Happening, everybody? Everybody's having a fantastic start to your week, bringing you in as part of the creative process. I tried doing this video as a standalone video and continuously failed spectacularly. So instead of doing this video, which was really more intended to be a standalone video, then come back and chat about it on the next live, I'm going live with this one because there's so much to cover. And to be honest with you, it's going to start to get a little bit circular with the way that this conversation is going to go. But we're talking about Gen 3 stroker combination. If you see me looking down a lot, by the way, it's because I got lots of notes that I'm going to be reading from here. So, main thing that I want to talk about when we're talking about stroker combinations is going to be obviously power, value proposition, what do you get for your dollar basically in terms of horsepower, and more or less what you can expect in terms of driving experience, ownership experience, things like that. Reasons why, by the way, you may want a stroker combination as opposed to supercharging, which is kind of where I'm taking this, because it was really hard for me to do this video as a standalone video because I was having a hard time getting going about the stroker combinations and then finding myself immediately comparing them to supercharged combinations that were making roughly the same power. So doing this live, it makes life a whole lot easier for me because I don't have to worry about going back, starting over, finding my place or whatnot. You guys are right here along with me for the conversation. So this is going to get kind of techie too, so believe me, this video, among many of mine, will be the sure cure for insomnia, probably by about the 3-minute mark. So let's jump into this. I'm going to first start talking about some 5.7 base stroker combinations. I'm going to be talking about these 5.7 stroker combinations as though they're going into a car with a car intake manifold, basically to kind of simplify some things when we're talking about power output, things like that. So in essence, what you have to start off with is you have to start off with a baseline. Most 5.7s are going to start off with about 3.25 horse. A solid cammed 5.7 is going to put down 370 horsepower to the rear wheels on an eddy current dyno, which is one other thing I need to put out there for you guys. I'm going to be talking about eddy current dyno numbers. I'll get into some dyno jet numbers, but I'm primarily going to be talking about eddy current stuff. So let me catch up with you guys real quick, and then I'm going to dive into it. Early birds are in. Marco Corleone is in with the flex. I like it. Marco Muitai is in. Got the flex as well, and Gary is checking in. Hello, everybody. All right, so what are the combinations? What are the options for a 5.7 liter based engine? One thing you got to remember about the 5.7, stock bore is basically close to 4 inches, but it's not exactly. It's 3.917. We'll say 3.92 bore. A lot of these numbers are going to sound kind of funny because you go 392. Yeah, it's a 3.92 inch bore, not a 392 bore. That's larger than this, by the way. Stock stroke is 3.578 or 3.58, which is the same stroke that you would see in the 6.1 and in the Hellcat engine. So what are your options? Well, keep that 3.578 stroke number handy because that'll help you reference where you're at in terms of how much stroke you're going to need to get to these cubic inch numbers. So let's start off with this. There's a 400 cubic inch option. Basically all in with the long block, you're looking at about $11,750. The 392 short block that I could find was $5,500. A little bit later, I'm going to get into more of these specific numbers as far as what all it's going to end up costing you, but I just want to work through the 5.7 stuff first, so that you can get an idea, a bit of a sense, and a bit of a flavor for what I'm talking about when I start talking about numbers and things like that. So basically, if you're looking at 5.7 based engine combinations, a cammed 5.7, again, is going to put down somewhere around 365, 370 to the rear wheels. That's on an eddy current dyno. the same that we had over at Pike's Performance. If you decide you want to go with a 4-inch stroke, which is going to make that engine kind of like a square setup, like what you guys may be familiar with a 408 combination with the Fords or the Chevys for that matter, 4-inch bore, 4-inch stroke, 30 over bore on that. That'll give you an idea as far as how that engine's going to respond and bore and, rod to stroke ratios. I don't even want to get into that because I don't feel like they're really all that important. But a typical 5.7 with a 392 stroker, we're talking cam, headers, ported stock intake, basically the bells and whistles. You're looking to put down about 425 horsepower to the rear wheels. Now, to put things into perspective, that is not that far off from what you would expect to see a roots blown 5.7 to put to the rear wheels. A fairly run-of-the-mill, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill, but a fairly mild low boost 5.7 will put down around those kind of numbers to the rear wheels. Basically, you'll be losing the torque that you would get with the positive displacement supercharger down low, like on that initial hit, but it'll still make the horsepower, and the combination is going to be about 100 and some change pounds lighter. There's another combination you can go with, which is a 400 stroker, which is a 4.080 stroke. All in on that same idea with horsepower per cubic inch all being the same. You're looking at about 440 horsepower to the rear wheels. That's a stout 390 5.7 based 400 stroker. Most 392s with all the bells and whistles, and consider the fact that the 392 does have a variable runner intake manifold, will put down about 30 horsepower more than that, primarily because of that intake manifold. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The 5.7 intake is really good. It's basically the same as a 6.1 intake in terms of performance. It keeps things very simple. You don't have to worry about actuators for short runner valves. Not that that's any big deal. Z Automotive makes one of those. You can make that thing work. But if you're looking for a more simple combination and something that's going to make a heck of a lot of mid-range power, that could be the way that you go. So now we're going to get into, and I want to leave it there for the 5.7s because I'll talk more costs and things like that on this part of the chat. So let me check in with you, and then we're going to get into the 392 base stuff. Mike G saying, evening chat, what's up? So you're saying, let's say you go stroker with a 392, but you have the sniper cam kit. Will you go back to the stock cam? Will you have to go back to the stock? No. You don't have to go back. The sniper wouldn't be actually terrible in a 426 with a stock intake manifold. It would have a power curve that would look a lot like if you dynoed a Hellcat in 500 horse mode. I don't have a dyno of that, but I might have a dyno, no, I don't have any sitting right here, of a really stout 392. Anyway, to give you an idea, if you take the dyno curve of a 392 with a cam, and you basically lift the left-hand side, so from your point of view, you lift the left-hand side of that curve, that's what it would look like. Make a whole lot of torque on tip-in as well. It'll be real drivable, lots of fun. Brian's in saying hello, B. Mason and everyone. Hello. Complex is saying good evening. Hello. And Chuck is in. All right, so let's talk about the 392 based stroker motors. This is where most of the, if you're going to build a stroker, by the way, start off with more displacement already. You can go anywhere from 426, 440, or even as much as 454, although I think 454 is a little bit of a stretch because it's a 4.25 bore, and I think that's a little bit much if I'm being honest. I think 440 is about as big as I would want to go for the street. Now, if you're building a race car, that's a horse of a completely different color. So let's talk about this. I'm going to talk about a short block option, and I'm going to talk about a long block option. This is the first one's going to be coming from Arrington. Now, keep in mind, if you're taking notes, we talked about superchargers at one point. Supercharging is going to cost you, let's call it I don't know, $17,000 for a really good kit, plus some fuel system bits, all the bells and whistles. I don't know that you would get much more than about maybe $18,000 at the most for a really well sorted out supercharger kit that's going to put down on a 392. We're talking positive displacement supercharger here. It's going to put down, say, 535, 540 to the rear wheels with torque to match. Okay. And that is going to be a tabletop flat torque curve with a horsepower curve that just keeps rising. So keep that in the back of your mind, $17,000 for your supercharger kit, and run with those numbers for horsepower. Again, I'll just say 530, 540 and torque to match, 540 on that. So for an Arrington short block, 440. You're looking at $6,500 for the short block. For all the rest of the stuff that would come with it, the cam, the push rods, lifter springs, stanky tie bars and collars, headers, gaskets, plugs, cam lock, fluids, filter, remove and replace the engine, because you're going to have to do that, obviously. Now we're going to start getting some labor. Tuning, shipping, you've got engine assembly, set of injectors, a throttle body, and shop supplies. I'm putting this together the same way that I would put this together working at the shop. Throw in an option like a ported stock intake manifold for the 440, $400. You're going to have a $500 throttle body you're going to want to throw in with that as well. Basically, $1,500 is what you're going to add to the final total of $19,724. You're basically not going to get out of this thing for less than about $21,000. And that is the least expensive option that you can roll with. And again, that is, well, in this scenario, okay, short block, having the shop actually do the assembly along with having all of this stuff right here. I may be missing something, but there's a lot to consider when you're putting one of these together. I think I covered pretty much everything. Long story short, $19,724.96. And again, you're going to probably add a grand for an aftermarket intake manifold. You got $500 for a Dr. Differential billet throttle body. And you may have another $1,000 in there for incidentals, incrementals, things that you add or do whatever along the way. So basically 21 grand. And what does that get you? Well, if you run this thing backwards, and you figure a very well sorted 392 with the cam is going to lay down somewhere around 475 horsepower to the rear wheels on an eddy current dyno. That 440 should put down somewhere around 530, 540 horsepower to the rear wheels, assuming all the same horsepower per cubic inch. A lot of that's going to depend on the intake manifold that you decide to go with. You decide to go with a sniper with a big cam, it can make more horsepower at the expense of some torque loss down low. Now with 440 cubic inches, you've got a lot to play with, which brings me kind of to my next stop here. If we're talking about putting stroker combinations together, one thing that I will say is you really want to start off adding significant numbers to your build. That's why I started out with the 440 and I didn't start with the 426. Even though 426 represents about a 10% gain, the 440, in my opinion, is about as big as I would go realistically for the street. And I think that if you build yourself an 11-to-1 440 sniper intake with a good cam, nice big throttle body, you can handily make bigger numbers than you could conceivably in terms of horsepower than if you went supercharged in this route. And it's weird that the numbers are eerily similar. 440, basically 530, 540 horsepower, or roughly the same as the supercharged variant of that engine. And if you want to translate that, by the way, to dynojet numbers, 560 to 580 horsepower would put you somewhere in the ballpark for dynojet numbers on this. By the way, dynojet numbers on a properly set up cammed 392 is going to put you just south of 500 horsepower. everybody always wants to make this 500 horsepower number to the rear wheels. And I'm going, it's too okay. 500 horsepower it is. So that's the number that I went with. But again, you know, that 440 is going to put you 560 to 580 on a dyno jet. Again, a lot of that, and a lot of these numbers, by the way, are going to depend on what intake manifold you run. So you say, well, what about if I decided to go with a long block? What would the cost of that be? Well, the thing is I looked up that, and if you went with MMX and you decided you wanted to go with a 4-inch stroke, which would basically give you a square combination. Again, that 392 cubic inch square combination with the 5.7 translates to the 426. You got a 4090 bore with a 4-inch stroke. You kind of get the idea. You see where I'm going with that. Same bore same stroke as the bore. The long block, pretty much either way you go, is about $15,500. That's 426 or 454. I'll hold off on the 454. I just don't think it's the right engine for the street. You got 15 grand in the long block. The R&R is still going to be the same. Tuning, plugs, fluids, filters, shipping, headers, high flow cats, injectors, shop supplies, and a throttle body. All get you, plus stanky tie bars and collars, gets you to, you know, roughly somewhere around, you know, $26,349.53 is what I came up with. And again, you may still need to add some money to that, say another $1,500 for incidentals. If you went with a, to go with a different intake manifold, that's going to be included with that as well. Extra labor for the different fuel lines. But notice that also, you know, that does not include a different fuel pump, which you probably won't need. But you are going to absolutely need basically everything else on this list and probably then some. And again, that cost came out to $26,349.53, and that's going to include taxes, and that's tax on material only. You don't charge tax on labor down here. So you're only getting taxed on the material, the actual physical goods that you're buying. Labor is assumed to have tax already factored into it. So what gives? Why is it that there's, you know, basically a $6,000 difference between the two? A lot of that has to do with the fact that you're paying their shops labor, their assembly, and in some cases their warranty dollars as well. So that's really where all that extra cost is coming from. And again, what can you expect? Well, a 426, here's the cool thing about a 426. You can still run the stock intake manifold with the 426. Definitely would want to do some, you know, porting, larger throttle body, things like that. But with the stock intake, you're looking at around 515 horsepower-ish to the rear wheels on a Mustang dyno. That's going to get you basically about 35, 40 horsepower over a 392, but it's going to be torque and horsepower literally across the entire rev range. So definitely nothing to sneeze at. I mean, you are talking about a significant bump. Dyno jet numbers, you're looking at like 540, 560 in some cases. Again, it's going to depend on what intake manifold you're running, and I'm basing this off of using a stock intake. I know guys are going to say, well, I've made more power than that. Look, these are just estimates, and these are streetable, not huge, lumpy cam. These are like good, properly set up street engines with enough cam to let you know you got something underneath the hood. And again, you're adding a lot of panache with this. There's, again, something to be said for stroker motor over a supercharger. Namely, again, you can holler out built not bought if you want, I guess. Anyway, but you've got the stroker motor combinations always kind of carry a little bit more swag with them. You know, doing all this is a big deal. And again, you keep the compression ratio somewhere between 10.5 and 11 to 1, the thing's going to run just fine on pump gas, which brings me around to this. I know that a lot of guys get worried that if they boost the 6.4, it's just that everything's made out of glass and all this other stuff. It's not like that at all. They just have too tight of a ring gap, to be perfectly honest. And since nobody is going to be really trying to turn the wick up on one of those cars for two reasons. One, ring gap too tight. Two, compression ratio really high at 11 to 1. Based on the bore sizing, you can make an argument that there's really not a whole lot of room to boost it, mainly because you're going to run into a situation where you could eventually butt those rings up. If you're going to be pulling the thing apart anyway, maybe a stroker motor isn't necessarily a bad thing. Mainly because if you run the thing at about 10 and a half, 11 to 1, you don't have to worry about fuel quality the way that you have to worry about with supercharging. Far and away less complex, because they're not going to give you that hard of a hit as depending on how much displacement you go. But based on what you would maybe be doing with a root style or positive displacement style supercharger, they could actually be a little bit easier on driveline components than your supercharged variant. They're certainly, again, going to be lighter because you don't have the supercharger and all the rest of the bits plus intercooling and everything else to worry about. So in that respect, it could be a better deal than going with a supercharger. But just know that the cost that you're going to come across with these things is going to be significant. And it's money that you don't ever see again. And that's, I guess, part of my, we're talking about value propositions before with the supercharged applications. The problem that you have with the stroker motor is that, man, you want to talk about never seeing this money ever again. You would have to sell the engine. In other words, you've got your stock engine sitting over there, put the stock engine back into the car, which, by the way, will cost you $3,000 for R&R. You'll have, who knows what you're going to have to actually spend on this, provided everything would go very smoothly. R&R is basically 21 and a half hours of labor. You could be looking at even more money than that to swap everything out, but you could possibly sell the engine, although that is not going to be a cheap proposition. Again, it's going to be real hard for you to get your money back out of a stroker motor the way that you could out of a supercharger kit that you could just as easily, put online and sell. And somebody will buy that supercharger kit. And again, you're not going to get all your money back. Nobody's saying you're going to get all your money back, but at least you'll be able to get a significant chunk, say 60, 70% of your cash back, as opposed to 10%, 15%. I mean, I get it. There's a seat for every ass and an ass for every seat, but it's going to take a real specialized person to buy a car with that much work being done to it. So that is the chat on stroker motors in a nutshell. Real quick, just so you guys have an idea for this stroker business. The stock bore on a 392 or on a Hellcat's 4.090 inches. The 426, again, 4-inch stroke on that. The 454 is going to be a 410 stroke. Now, when you start getting into, the 454 is a 4 1/4 stroke. 440 is also 4 1/4 stroke. 454 stroker has a 4 1/4 bore. So just want to make sure I completely confused the hell out of myself on that deal. Anyway, just want to get you guys caught up with that. Again, for you 5.7 guys, you guys have a stock stroke of 3.578, which is the same as the Hellcat. You've got a bore of 3.917. And your 4080 bore is your 400 stroker. And your 4-inch stroke is going to be your 392 stroker. So hopefully that kind of gives you guys an idea for, if y'all are into rods, stroke ratio, and all of that kind of good stuff. That'll give you an idea as far as really what you're going to be working with. But all of these engine combinations, once they're built and in the car is going to run great. I do have some experience with some of the stroker combinations. They actually made a little bit more power than, some of these numbers that I was quoting. Again, the 515, 525, whatever horsepower for the 426. I think these made a little bit more than that. They're like 440-ish. These are 426 stroker motors with some very healthy cams. One of them for sure had one of my cams in it. And, it made like 445, and the car made a great torque, the whole bit. Used the Victor, Edelbrock Victor intake on that one. And the car did great. What would I compare it to driving? Just a real healthy running big block car. I mean, you get this certain feel driving the thing that you don't really get with a supercharged car. You tip into the throttle and the thing just wants to go. Real snappy, really good throttle response. If you like a 392, you would love a 440, or if you like a 392, you would fall in love with a 426. It really is that good in terms of a driving experience. Now, is it $21,000 good? Is it $24,000 good? Is it $26,000, $28,000 good? I don't know. That's kind of tough, because if you're looking for a number, probably not. And by the way, this is when you start going with a stroker combination, it is understood that you are not trying to make Hellcat numbers with the stroker engine. You have gone this direction because you are a fan of naturally aspirated power. I wouldn't ask any of these combinations to try to make much more than, 600-ish wheel horsepower. That would be as much as a stock Hellcat. And really, that would even be asking a bit too much. I mean, that would be a 440 or a 454 with a sniper, 102 millimeter throttle body, big cam. We're talking 230, 240 minimum. I mean, I would say probably 236, 242 on the cam. I'd probably rock that thing back to like a 109, 110 intake center line, and try to narrow up the power band a little bit, because it's going to want to scream with that intake. I would try to probably run something. Actually, I might even advance that cam to like 108, 107 and bring that cam in at like a 110, 112-ish at the most lobe separation angle. It would be pretty lumpy for sure. And it would certainly make a number, no doubt about that. But you're doing this because you want the sound, you want the throttle response, you want the driving experience, basically of an old school muscle car, that ratty, nasty, gritty feel. You're going to get that with a stroker combination. And to be honest with you, you'll really get it if you have a manual car. That's when things will shine with that stroker motor. So when would I do a stroker motor over a supercharger? Well, when I wanted something that was just for me, if I wanted something that was basically a nostalgia hot rod, that I really wasn't worried about drivability. I'm not necessarily worried about idle quality. I'm not worried about any of that. What I'm looking for is a driving experience more than anything. You take your 440 or your 426, put the Eddy intake on it if you want, put a Sniper, any of those other more modern LS looking intakes on it, put a big cam in it. Again, mid 230s on the intake side, mid 240s on the exhaust side, at least early 240s at the minimum. You're going to rock that thing forward, tighten up the LSA, and I would put it in a car with a manual transmission. You want to talk about something that would be super fun and would absolutely turn heads with the way that it sounded, the pop the hood, the way that that thing looks underneath that freaking hood popping open. You see that intake manifold and see that gear shifter right there. That's going to be what you're going to want. And don't worry about what the thing runs in the quarter mile. Now, if you want to build a race car out of this for the quarter mile, that's a completely different story. But for me, I'm a big fan of naturally aspirated hot rods as well. And there's just something about a lumpy big block or big block cubic inch wise, that will always, tug at your heartstrings. And again, you couple that combination in a car with a manual transmission, and I mean, you're immediately transported back to old school street racing, back before you could get your car confiscated. So anyway, let me check in with you guys real quick. Complex is in. Chuck is in. What's up? Ronald is in. Tampa in the house. I like it. Stuart's asking, with the stroker kits, will you have to bore out the cylinder, or are you just making a longer stroke? It depends. You can do both. A lot of the kits come with options for 5 over or 10 over pistons. I would probably go 5 over and just give it a cleanup. But the short blocks all come basically however you want them, and I would typically go 5 over for those. Oh, Chuck's asking about RT life. I don't know. Eric's saying 392 NA single cab 05 Ram in the house. I love it. Oh, that's right. Yeah, he does have a 5.7 base stroker, I believe. Destroyer's in. Sup? Smug's asking, could you still use a ported 392 intake and 84 millimeter throttle body on a 440? Sure you can. Or would it not flow enough for the stroker? It flows plenty enough. The question is where is it going to make power, and what are you looking for out of that thing? So you got to remember that it flows well enough up to 4,700 RPM to be in long runner mode. So yeah, I mean, basically what you would do in the tune is you would just advance. Well, actually you would leave it probably alone, and just kind of play with your short runner actuator in terms of RPM. It'll flow just fine, probably to 62, 6,300 RPM. And again, depending on how you have the car set up, if you have a cam with a tight lobe separation angle, say like a 113 or a 114, you've got a cam in there that works well with that intake, by the way, is what I'm putting together in my head. So that would be like a 226 on the intake side and about a 234 on the exhaust side. On like a 114 degree lobe separation angle, intake center line of around 107, 108, kind of run a little bit more advanced, actually about 107. That would actually be a really fun combination and make a lot of torque all over the place, and you wouldn't have to worry about spinning it to the moon. So again, it just depends on what you're looking for, and again, there's a lot of different ways you can skin these cats, guys. I'm reminded of, putting combinations together that work really well for the street. That's really what I had been trying to do with all of my cams and all of my combinations, is put stuff together that'll put you in a place where you want to drive the car. And, you will know where your money's been spent the second that you roll into the throttle at partial throttle. When the thing wants to start hazing the tires in second and third gear and you're not really wanting it to, that's when you know you've done it right. So, yeah, you could definitely do that. Mike's asking about adjustable control arms. BMR is good. Spawn is also good, but they're a little bit noisy. Sovereign Knight is in. What's up? Got the flex. Sovereign saying keep the 485 or the 392 stock. He likes his 485 ponies. Very good. Randy's in from Middle Tennessee. What's up, brother? Madera's in. Oh, Madera's asking, good question. A lot of guys have this question. It's understandable too. Hey, B, what's the difference between a small block and a big block? Same displacement, let's say 390. So real easy one you can look towards are the Chevy small blocks. So you had 262 all the way up to a 400 small block. Big blocks, you had 396. I think there were some smaller ones in there also. And all it is it's the height of the deck, and it's bore spacing. So how far are the cylinders away from each other in the block, basically. Big block, they're typically further away. Small block, they're closer. What you want to think of is like a 361 is a good one. A 361 is a Dodge big block. A 352 is a Ford big block. It doesn't necessarily mean that the displacement is big. It just means that the displacement is held within a larger engine block. So, for example, the 361 is the predecessor to the 383, which would be the short deck big block, so shorter deck, but still a big block, Mopar. The RB, or the raised block, would have been that same block, just raised, and that would be the predecessor to the 413, the 426, the 426 Hemi. Gotta remember there was a 426 wedge before there was a Hemi. And then the final iteration of that would have been the 440. Don't forget the 400 small block was a short deck small block. I'm sorry, short deck big block. Was it part of the 383? Was it an RB or was it a B? Anyway, old school Mopars start to blow my mind. So anyway, you get the idea though. The big block just has the ability to be made bigger in terms of bore sizing. And because you've got more space between the center line of the crankshaft and the top of the block, you've got more room for a longer stroke in there as well. So bigger bore, more stroke, more cubic inches, or at least the potential for more cubic inches. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that that big block is more robust. It can sometimes just mean that it's a bigger engine and it's got smaller bores, but very large water jackets to be used at under high load, extended period service. Like one to think of would be like some of there were some Mopar, like 361, I think was one of them. That was like a truck motor. Could get it in a car too, I believe, but it was kind of like that, from if I remember correctly. Again, some of the early big block Mopars kind of throw me for a loop. Chuck's hanging out with Sovereign. Let's see. Gary's asking, when you get up in the 426 and up stroker, what kind of RPM can you expect to run on the different fuels? 93, 104, E85, etc. It's up to you. Keep a few things in mind though. Let's say you're running a 426. What intake are you going to run? Because the intake, along with the camshaft, is going to determine where that thing's going to make power and how high you're going to rev it up. I prefer, if possible, to see these things making peak power somewhere around 6,500 RPM, maybe give you a shift point with carryover, give you some run out to about 7,000 RPM. With a stock intake, you're looking at 6,200 RPM-ish, 6,300 RPM for max power. With a sniper or with any of the more LS drive looking intakes, you're going to be trying to push that more towards 7,200 RPM-ish, give or take. And for the Edelbrock, it's going to be somewhere kind of in between. So, it just depends on how you want to put the thing together and how much you really want it to wrap out. But, E85, the thing, okay, so let's talk about this. 104 octane, E85. The only thing that the fuel is going to do for you is allow you to run more compression. If you don't have the compression to take advantage of the fuel, then the fuel won't do you any good, whether it is 104 octane, 100 octane, E85, all of that. It doesn't matter. I mean, heck, you can make this thing basically, an 8-to-1 engine, and it'll still spin to 7,000 RPM, and it would do it with 87 octane, depending on how you have the tune set up. So it really doesn't have the RPM equivalent for fuel doesn't exist. It's how do you want to build the engine, and you build the engine around the fuel that you feel comfortable running it on. If you have access to really clean E85, well, then my suggestion would be to build a 13.5-to-1 engine that runs on E85. That way you can actually take advantage of the benefits of the E85 in your NA combination. Some people will argue that I'm being a little bitch when I talk about compression ratios for E85, and they're saying go big or go home, and they'll tell you 13.5 is cute, but the real money's going to come in around 14.5 to 15.5 to 1. Guys that race could even see higher numbers than that. So again, it just depends on what your level of comfort is. But I can assure you that an 11-to-1 engine on 93 octane would be just as happy as it could possibly be. You'd be able to spin it to 7,200 RPM, no problem, depending on the intake that you're running. Stanky tie bars and collars, make sure you got good springs, etc. All that comes with it. But personally, all that is pretty cool. I kind of will err on the side of old man caution on this, and I like a lot of tip-in torque now. And, if you decided you wanted to run a stock intake, put a cam in it that's going to work well with the stock intake, and you could probably build a tow truck motor out of one of these things. No problem. Chuck's checking in saying, still enjoying his old school RT shaker. I like it. Oh, Randy's saying his SRT 392 6-speed, absolute blast to drive. The Barton shifter made a huge difference in driving. Absolutely, and I highly recommend it. See, Sovereign's hanging out with Chuck. X saying, what up, Professor? What up, man? Let's see. Let you guys hang out with each other for a minute. Let's see. Chuck saying V8 only for me. I love it. Yeah, gas prices are nuts for sure. Some are saying, well, the SXT basically, the only difference between a 6-cylinder and 8-cylinder lacks the sound and it lacks the punch, for sure. Chuck saying he actually had more fun in the Scat than the Red Eye on the street, which I can completely understand. Had to get out in wide open straight always to punch the kitty. And that's what a lot of guys, this is something else to consider, guys. If you're thinking about, what's better, stroker or supercharger combination. Oh, by the way, I want y'all to notice something, that I was talking about positive displacement superchargers with this. Notice I didn't ever once mention centrifugal superchargers, aka Pro Charger, Torque Storm, or whatever. The reason I didn't mention it is because we're talking cubic inches here. What Boost does is it basically adds displacement to the engine. Positive supercharger does it from the hit. So it's in essence giving you that extra cubic inches in air via pressure in the cylinder. Now, the reason why I didn't bring up the centrifugal is because it has a rising boost curve. And because it has a rising boost curve, you don't get the benefits of boosting that thing until you get it into higher RPM. You're not going to see any gains down low. You're going to see these train tracks that just keep following each other with the torque and the horsepower. Eventually they'll split off, but you get what I'm saying. And it's not analogous to having a stroker motor in the car. It's really more as you would expect, like a 392 with a sniper intake and a big cam with a wide lobe separation angle. That's going to give you the same driving experience as putting a centrifugal supercharger in the car, which is to say, well, it just make less power, but that is to say that it will keep rising and keep making power, but it's going to feel sluggish and lazy. So we're looking for combinations that have a lot of kick, a lot of pop, that are a lot of fun and have a lot of panache to go along with them. They got some swagger about them that the other ones just won't have. Gary, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. Saying thanks again. No, man, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, brother. I don't know what I did. Chuck, thank you, brother. Didn't have a question, but thank you very much. Thank you so much, my friends. I appreciate that. Sorry, getting back over here. But yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate that, fellas. Let's see. And I blew right past that. Sorry, guys. Saw that and I had to get on it. Let's see. Stuart's asking, would I ever work at a Dodge dealership as a tech? Probably not. That would be kind of tough for me to do. Being a tech's tough, and at this stage, I mean, if I were younger, I'd probably do it. Chuck saying smiles per mile. Hell yeah. Let's see. Brandon's saying, I need help. He's got 11,000 miles on a 6.4. Gave it an oil change. Now I hear a fast tapping sound when it's cold. It's when it's cold, it's worse. Y'all think it could be an exhaust leak due to the headers or straight up lifter? Well, there's no way to tell. He's saying a fast tapping sound when it's cold. Okay, so I got to ask some dumb questions. You gave it an oil change. Did you remember to put oil in it? I know that's a dumb sounding question, but it's happened before. It's got a loud tapping sound. Did you put enough oil in it? Does the tapping noise go away when the car warms up? In other words, you fire it up, it tap, 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 tap for maybe at most 10 or 12 seconds, and then it goes away. That would be a exhaust leak due to a manifold bolt. Now, typically 6.4s don't have that issue because they're more or less headers. Does it go away when you rev the engine, but then it comes back down to idle and taps? At that point, that could be a bad cam. Or if it doesn't go away when you rev the thing up and it sounds more like a clock, like clock, 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 than a tip, 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 tap, that would be a rod knock, which hopefully you don't have. If you've got headers, though, it could absolutely be an exhaust leak. And that's one of the banes of existence, owning headers. Make sure you've got anti-seize on your bolts, tighten them down properly, check them regularly, and make sure they're not backing out. Sometimes you got to check them 4 or 5 times before they actually seat down. Yeah, Sovereign saying, Brad, 11,000 miles is really low. I think it'd be a leak. Hopefully it's a leak. I mean, like I say, man, being around these things a lot, you see all kinds of stuff. HU saying, oh, the 400 had the stroke of the 383 of the larger piston. Okay, cool. 400's actually, the funny thing about the 400 is that the 400, whether it's the Chevy or the Dodge, maybe the Ford too. The Ford's kind of cool because it's kind of like a big Cleveland. But the Chevy and the Dodge 400, the 400 era, was a weird point in time, and the 400s were all considered to be dogs, but because they're just smog motors, they're there to create torque at low RPM. All of them had maximum RPM of peak power was all at like 4,000 RPM on even like hotter versions. But anyway, the idea is that, a little known secret, you can build some nasty power with those things, should one choose to do so. Chuck, thank you very much, buddy. Saying the Scat Shaker 6-speed gave me a very similar driving experience as my RT Shaker. I think I am leaning towards the Shaker Scat next. Shaker Scat's a lot of fun. It's probably one of my favorites, if not my number one favorite. That and the 1320, but I like the Shaker for the fact that I think it's a better intake. But the other side of it is just it's just cool looking. But thank you very much, buddy. Yeah, Shaker's the way that I would go if I went with an NA. Let's see. Some are saying, but a leak, talking to Brandon saying, but even a leak at 11,000 isn't good either. Yeah, if you've got an aftermarket set of headers, though, you never know. He says, when I pass by an overpass or a building, I could hear it loud and sounds exactly like a faulty lifter, but 11,000 is pretty crazy. And he doesn't let it sit in idle for any length of time. Yeah, man, I don't know. Tough to say. BRR saying Chrysler also had a 350 cubic inch big block before the 361. Yes, they did. And as a matter of fact, that 350 big block was the engine that was featured in a very famous movie car called Christine, which was the dual quad 350 cubic inch B big block, which would have been that engine that you're referencing. So yes, 100% accurate on that. Chuck, thank you very much. Man, I appreciate that a ton. Say, sorry, I haven't been able to contribute more lately, bro. Paying off Christmas stuff. Boy, do I know the feeling on that one. But I appreciate it, brother. I really do. But yep, Christine, technically a Belvedere, but was given the name Fury because it just sounded good. Actually, the Furies of that day were, what were they, silver and gold or silver and white or something like that? Was the actual paint scheme of those Furies. But yeah, technically the red with a white top would have been a Belvedere. But she was a Fury because, I mean, what else? You wouldn't call Christine Belvedere. Brandon's, Sovereign saying, yeah, the old pump doesn't offer enough PSI at idle. I'll tell you what, I mean, I've seen the oil pressure in my work truck. I'm telling you, they did something different with the oil pump because it does have more pressure than my old truck. Brandon said he did a video. Someone said it could be the cam lobes or the exhaust leak. I mean, best way to get down there or figure it out is to, have the car idling, feel around the collector, see if that collector bolt, if the collector bolts have backed off. Then feel around as the car is idling around where the headers are bolted to the engine. If you feel it puffing out somewhere, it's obviously a leak. So what can happen is if one of the header bolts or two of the header bolts start to back off, what'll happen is it can cook the flange, and sometimes that flange will bow out a little bit. It'll end up frying the exhaust gasket in some cases. So just food for thought, stuff that I had to look for. Whenever I'll put you like this, when I was doing the intake, in other words, basically getting all the data on a car before we did any work to it, long tube headers were the bane of my existence. I hated dealing with cars with long tube headers because any leak in a long tube header means we can't tune the car. That has to get fixed before we can mess with it. And of course, telling the owner, hey, dude, you got an exhaust leak. We can't do anything with your car. And they're going, what? The car runs fine. And we're going, yeah. Okay. But yeah, it creates a lot of problems, honestly. So just something to be aware of. And again, Gary, thank you very much, buddy. Madera's asking about small block has nothing to do with the material of the block. No, not at all. Talking about 396 small block, all alloy, 390 iron or steel. No, it doesn't. No, it has absolutely nothing to do with the material that the block is made from. I mean, if that were the case, then, an all aluminum big block would be something else compared to an all iron big block, right? So, yeah, no, it has nothing to do with that at all. And it's literally all about the physical size of the block itself, the bore spacing, and everything that comes with that. So, Randy saying, I cannot imagine a 15-to-1 compression engine. The big boys back in the day was 12 or 13. Yeah, nowadays, you'd be surprised at what people get away with on the street. Now, for the most part, the guys that are turning the wick up that high, those aren't really street engines. They're reserving that compression ratio for the drag strip. But thing is you can do that with E85 provided you've got really good E85. Now, with that being said, would I recommend it? Yeah, probably not. But 13-to-1, 13.5-to-1, yeah, maybe. I mean, you got to figure you're looking at least a 6% or some more increase in power over 11-to-1, which is to say 30 odd horsepower, give or take, to the rear wheels. And, I mean, it's, you're going to be able to utilize the E85 at that point. But again, if you're building something really more for the street, just build something that's 93 or 91 octane appropriate. 11-to-1 nowadays with modern electronics is good. If you have a 91 octane available in your area, maybe you cheat it down to 10.5. It's not going to make that big of a difference in terms of power, how the car runs or feels to drive. And so that might be an option for you if you decided to go that route. But yeah, you'd be surprised what's out there. Hemi Tuner is building a billet 426 stroker for my Hellcat. My kid isn't going to college. Nice. Some frog guy saying, seen any Mach 1s at the strip? Yeah, I've seen a couple. Actually, I've seen a Mach 1 a couple of times, I guess I should say. The new Mach 1 just notched the fastest time of any LL2 car at the Lightning Lap. So much for just being a parts bin car. It beat the GT 350R by half a second. I tell you what, guys, y'all been hearing me talk about the Mach 1 when it first came out. I love the car to death. Don't understand why it didn't catch on more, because it is probably the best out of all of them, in my opinion. Oh, T Mopar saying he's got a 397 stroker base 5.7. Very nice. That's got to run good, especially in a Grand Cherokee. T Mopar saying currently on nitrous, putting together twin turbos. That'll be fun. Someone saying dropping those Andrew Jacksons, bro. Those are Benjis, man. Andrew's trying to catch up. Eric saying, I get it. I want an E-Force my 392. Probably a fun way to go. Again, when you're talking the cost differences here, yeah, there's a big cost difference. E-Force is going to be a lot more refined. It's going to obviously have a stock idle quality. It's going to get stock miles per gallons, stock drivability, stock livability. Some guys want rowdy. Some guys want that nasty sound. Some guys want nasty, period. Well, you got to spend some nasty cash to get there. Power costs money, but stroker money, that's a whole different ballgame. So, Sovereign saying, I thought I heard something about the 392 could at max handle 6 pounds of boost, and that's it. So it's sort of, it depends on the fuel that you're running. But the reality is that I wouldn't try to get much more than that out of it, mainly because, again, ring gap's really tight. It's designed to be extremely efficient with a naturally aspirated design in mind. So it's really good in that respect, but again, it kind of stings it when it comes to throwing boost on the thing. A lot of it depends on the tune. A lot of it depends on the fuel quality. More than anything, it really depends on fuel quality and tuning. You could probably get away with more. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I can tell you that, well, I know you can get away with more. I'm just not going to get too in depth with how you can get away with it. But the 5 to 7 rule is what you want to stick to with the 392. And believe me when I tell you, it's half an atmosphere, okay? And half an atmosphere is not too shabby, really, when you think about it. And with a mild, or at least an appropriate, I don't like using the term mild, it gives the wrong idea. With the appropriate tune, the thing's going to make 520, 530, 540, depending on which kit you get and the tune and the fuel quality. But you're going to be up there in power, and it's going to have all the drivability, streetability, livability, fuel economy, and everything else that the stock car had. So there is that to consider, and a lot of guys like that. Let me kind of work you guys into this part. Let me insert myself into this. You guys may or may not have seen the picture of me doing the burnout in my old Gen 2 ACR. That was a heads cam. One of my cams. I did not port the heads, but the heads were ported. Had 1.7 roller rockers. I did some work to the intake manifold, had larger throttle bodies, and I cobbled up my own cold air kit for that thing. it made decent power. I'm not talking about on nitrous, but the car made okay power for what it was. What I would have wished I would have done is supercharged it as a stock car, because I had more issues with that thing with the cam than I had anything else. Drivability issues, livability issues, things like that. Basically, I did a good job at ruining a perfectly serviceable Viper. But that's what I wanted, because I wanted something naturally aspirated. I didn't want the complexity or the extra weight of the supercharger, because I was going to be actually running the thing on closed courses. And I just didn't want a supercharger. Felt like that would possibly be an issue with heat at the time. So, ended up not going to supercharger ever with it, and ended up going nitrous. So I still went power adder, but I went nitrous. But the idea here is that the drivability and livability would have been a whole lot better, obviously, with a supercharger. And going with, it wasn't a stroker, it was stock displacement, still 488 cubic inches. But had I gone a stroker motor with that thing, it would have probably been a little bit of overkill, just in terms of, shaking your teeth to death. So again, if you go stroker motor, the point of that story, this is again my way of going around my elbow to get to my ass. The fact of the matter is that you have to have a goal in mind. I mean, we're talking about fuels earlier, compression ratios, intake manifolds, and all of that. You have got to get with your builder, whoever is going to be installing this engine, and hopefully they've built or put together and tuned stroker combinations getting into this endeavor, because this partnership is going to be, it's going to be tough, and there's really no going back unless your builder just says, no, I do not like the outcome of this. I'm absolutely going to be going, we're going to tear this thing apart. I'm going to do something else with this thing. There's no making it different once you get it to this point. And what I mean by that is, have an idea for where you want this thing to make power. Have an idea for how this car is going to act in terms of drivability. What really are your goals and expectations because of the cost that's involved with this thing? And again, getting back to, for a 5.7 base stroker, you can maybe get away with 17, 18,000, but the reality is you're going to be into this thing for at least 20 grand, if not 26, 27 grand. You're definitely not going to want to have to spend money on it again if you're not super happy with the results. So this is one of those situations where it's measure 3 or 4 times, start cutting it, and then measure 3 or 4 more times to make sure you get it right. Know what intake manifold you want to run with. Know what the RPM range is. Is this thing going to be a cruiser? Is it going to be a race car? There is, and by the way, since we're talking about it, there isn't really an in-between. I know a lot of us try to make our street cars into race cars, put all these race parts on it and think, oh, there's going to be this breakover point or a happy meet. There's not. Especially when you start putting camshafts in these things and they get real rowdy and real racy. And believe me, it's adorable for about 2 months, 3 months. And then it gets annoying and you're going to run into tuning issues and it's not exactly acting right. That's when the extra power just isn't necessarily worth it. So my advice is always to err on the side of caution, err on the side of chill a little bit. Save the big cam and the super tight lobe separation angles for somebody who's actually racing and can actually use that stuff, and put something together for the street that actually works on the street and will allow you to have a lot of fun without the downside necessarily of having something that is practically unlivable to deal with. Because I've done that a couple of times, and I feel like I didn't. The Viper was really good, don't get me wrong. The Z06, on the other hand, a little bit too much cam, just a little bit too much pepper in the in the gumbo on that one. That car ran so freaking good, especially for only having 5.7 liters. That thing screamed. That car didn't get interesting until about 4,500 RPM. Man, when it came on the cam, holy mackerel. Anyway, getting back to it, just make sure that you're doing the right thing by yourself. And what I mean by that is think of how you're going to feel about this thing in 6 months. And if you still want to even keep the thing or have it around. The other thing is that it's really hard to sell something with that much rowdiness going on. A lot of people get put off by it. So it's always good to have some kind of spice to it, but just make sure that you're going about it the right way. Follow a recipe, so to speak, and you'll be in good shape. Let's see. Oh, Brandon's hanging out with Sovereign. Let's see. Eric's saying, yep, 5.7, lots of power, and a 392. Yes, it is. Let's see. Stuart's asking, what is the most underrated V8 of all time? Probably Pontiac 421. That is a nasty little engine. The most overrated would be the 426 Hemi. Someone saying Plymouth Fury. That's right. Oh, Gary's saying underrated in terms of any power or power it can make without being opened up. Oh, Stuart's saying Plymouth was gold and white. That's correct. Yeah, that's the actual Fury paint scheme for 58, I believe, was gold and white. Oh, Chuck's saying, talking to Gary, he drove a shaker Scat and then a red eye. Way more fun in the Scat. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Scats are right, man. And that's the thing. I mean, they get, the funny thing is that car gets compared to Mustangs all the time, and I'm just going, not really a fair comparison. It's really hard to compare a muscle car that has Mercedes-Benz DNA, and I mean E-Class DNA, versus a Mustang that I think, if I remember correctly, has Jag S-type DNA. That's going back a lot, though. It's going back to like 2008 when they were talking about the new Mustang then. Chuck's at Sovereign looks like the Scat's way to go. Scats are a lot of fun. Oh, Gary's saying either a Roadrunner, 13, 14 Boss motor, or a 15 to 17 Mustang GT. Oh, talking about underrated. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because each era has its own high points and low points. But if you're going to say like one overrated engine, but it didn't, would be the Gen 2 8-liter Viper engine. When it first came out, it was only 400 horsepower out of 8 liters, 450 for the second run, the second gen. They really didn't start coming into their own until later on, but the car just made a ton of torque. So it was really hard to fault them, but in terms of being underwhelming or maybe underperforming, maybe that, but the weight of that car being so light, it made it feel a lot faster. But I don't know, underrated, the Pontiac 421 was pretty beastly. Chuck and Shift, thank you all very much. Chuck's asking, can I get 10 years out of a shaker Scat as an everyday driver with good maintenance, 6-speed? Yeah, easily. Yeah, you'd probably get more than that out of it, actually. We've seen a ton of them with 140, 150, 160,000 miles. I mean, that if they're maintained, there's absolutely no problem. I mean, the same architecture is in the trucks. Now, granted, they're not old yet. They just have a lot of miles on them. Mine's got, I'm looking over here like it's going to tell me how many miles it's got on it. Why do people do that? You ever notice that? Like you turn down the radio so you can see better. I'm looking over, my truck's sitting right over here. I'm looking over here like, truck, how many miles you got on it? It's got 141,000 miles on it, I think now, 143, something like that. I'm still doing it. I'm talking about it. I'm making fun of me and I'm still doing it. Anyway, it's got 140,000 miles on it. Truck runs like it's brand new. That truck probably runs better than what it did brand new. Hell, we would see Hellcats. There were quite a few guys that daily drove Hellcat Chargers. They used them for, there were guys that were territory managers that ran from Houston to Louisiana and back, or they'd go from Houston to El Paso and back, or they just, would go either way that way. And ran Hellcat Chargers, and those things would have a couple 100,000 miles on them really quickly, and it didn't affect how they ran whatsoever. So yeah, maintain the hell out of it, and you should have no problem getting a ton of longevity out of them. El Profe, what's up? Shift Nation. Tuesday night shift is the best. Thanks. Absolutely. Appreciate it, brother, with the arm flex. I like it. Thank you, brothers. I appreciate that. Let's see. Bear with me here, guys. But thank you all very much, guys. I appreciate it. Chuck saying, I was sideways around 80 miles an hour with the kitty. Telephone pole was getting closer. No issues in the scat pack. Car runs fine-ish. Chuck said, I think I can just drive an NA Challenger better than a boosted Hemi. Sound absolutely insane in the cat. I'll end up going to jail. 9X thinking, thank you for all the knowledge, B. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate the compliment. Or thank you for the thank you. But here's asking, what is the difference between the 427 single overhead cam, the 427 side oiler Ford blocks, big blocks, and what application were they used for? 427 side oiler was a performance competition-based engine. You'd see them in, you could actually buy them from Ford Racing, but you would see them in like Galaxies. Believe it or not, there was one Mustang, I think, that had a side oiler put in it. It was a Shelby car that those typically had 428s and 429s. They didn't come with 427s. The single overhead cam engine was available through Ford Performance Parts over the counter. It was never put into any actual factory car unless it was a factory race car like a Thunderbolt. Maybe one of those would have had it, but typically a Thunderbolt would have had a side oiler 427 as well. So high compression, very high flowing heads, very high flowing intake manifold. You can, in a way, the side oiler, you can think of it like the Chevy L88, about as close as a likeness as you can get. Obviously not a Hemi, but it is it is not a 385 series. If I remember correctly, it's not a 385 series block. Might be wrong about that, but I don't believe it's a 385 series block. But the single overhead cam engines, they were really more of a homologation engine. And then when NASCAR said, no, you can't run overhead cam stuff, which was stupid because you had Buick looking at overhead cam. You had Project 906, which was I think it was it Project 906? Anyway, that was Dodge's overhead cam version of the 426 Hemi. That would have been a 4 valve per cylinder deal also. They too called it a Hemi, even though it was 4 valve, and it would technically have been a Pentastar head, but they were still calling it a Hemi even back then. Lots of that going on. But that was at a time when you had a lot of different engine families that were coming out. You had the ball stud Hemi, which was going to be the Hemi to take the place of the 426 Hemi that never became to be. There was only, I think, 2 or 3 prototype engines, and one of those engines belonged to a car that was in a Barracuda that was in Houston for a long time. and then was donated to a museum at some point. Anyway, that's a running ball stud Hemi, but there's very few of those cars running around, or very few of those engines. There was only 3, literally very few. So, but anyway, at that point in time, a lot of the manufacturers heavy into racing, and racing was that racing was a huge deal back then. And so because of that, manufacturers were very involved in it, but they also had to have engines that would actually be able to be produced and put into vehicles, which quite honestly, the Hemi was a pain in the ass to build. So the ball stud Hemi, among other things, had a more what you would consider to be traditional rocker layout. The plugs were in the side of the head instead of right in the middle of the valve cover. Anyway, I don't know how I got onto that topic talking about 427s, but anyway, there you go. The big difference is that obviously the SOHC engines had the cams on top of a completely different set of cylinder heads. Totally different engine. So I was asking, what's the max total horsepower you could squeeze out of a 392 without boost adders, but with long tubes and other mods? Well, depends on how hairy you wanted to get with your build, buddy. I mean, if you wanted to just leave it stock short block, don't take the heads off the thing. Just you'd have to take the heads off to put a cam in it, but you get the idea. In other words, you're not throwing a lot more compression at it or anything else. I think the walking around accepted number is about 515 to the rear wheels that you'll be able to drag out of one of those things on a DynoJet dyno. So I don't know. I mean, you could probably get more out of that thing if you decided you wanted to go with higher compression, build 13.5 to 1 like I was talking about earlier with that stroker. And then go with a different intake manifold to really be able to take advantage of RPM with that thing. You could probably stretch that up to about 540, 550-ish. But I think at that point, you're really going to be stressing the limits of valve train components more than anything else. And quite honestly, I mean, I don't think that it would really be recognizable as a street engine so much anymore at that point. The cam profile would make it real nasty on the street. And I don't mean nasty like nasty. I mean nasty like, damn. And I don't mean, damn, like, damn. I just mean like, damn, I don't feel like driving that thing. It's just going to be a chore to deal with on a regular basis. So 550-ish would be like the ultra super far end of that. I think the livable max that you would really look at, though, is really more like 5. This is, again, DynoJet numbers, because a lot of folks understand those numbers better. Again, that 515 starts to really call out to me. I know what it takes to get to those kind of numbers, and I know how rowdy those cars are just in general. And that is a ton of power, by the way. I mean, that's an extra 60 or 70 horsepower over stock. And although some people might say, that's not all that much, you got to remember you're starting off with a really big number compared to the 6.2s that you would work with from Chevy that just they're under cammed from the factory. So, I mean, you can't say, they respond really well to a cam. Yeah, because their factory camas suck. So, yeah, it's going to do pretty good. Anyway, that would be about what I would kind of, that's the, like if you were sitting across the table from me and I'm walking you through combinations, that's what I would say. And I would even tell you, look, I ain't going to promise you 550. I'm just going to tell you that what sounds like more than 515, and you have to do significantly more to the engine to get much more than that, you're going to have to be turning some significant RPM, which again means that you're going to have a maintenance issue more than anything else. Rockers don't like getting beat up like that. You're going to have to run a lot of spring pressure way up there to control the big heavy valves that you're working with. Again, just some things to think about when you're looking to build power with them. So I was telling Chuck a Hellcat would either kill me or get me into serious trouble. I know the feeling. Chuck said, I think long tubes, a cam, and a tune would be nasty in a scat. It is nasty in a scat. It works well, too. Ship's asking, do all A8s and M6 scats have the same OEM cam? They have the same specs, but it's not exactly the same part number. but the specifications are all, yeah, it's basically very, very similar. Not asking, do you think bad catalytic converters will cause problems at wide open throttle at around 140 miles an hour? Bad catalytic converters will cause problems at all RPMs, not just wide open throttle and not just at high loads. So the answer to that is yes, but it'll cause issues, more issues all the way around. Oh, Sovereign saying to get a scat around 500 to 520 NA without boost. Yeah, you can. I mean, it will take camshaft and it will take long tubes, and it's going to take quite a bit to get there. It's going to take kind of a rowdy cam to get there, to get to the 500 number on a dyno jet, but you can do it, or at least get fairly close. And it would still be a pretty fun car to drive. But you start to get kind of rowdy at about the legit 500 horse mark. So I know that Quick Brick's car made 497. And that was with the baby cam on E85 with a ported stock manifold and a larger throttle body. So there's so many ways to get there, right? But, the E85 helped a little bit. But I mean, you can get to 500 with a small cam. The weird thing is getting from 500 to 515 it's a lot of heavy lifting, actually. I mean, in terms of, let me explain what I mean by that. It's not that you can't do it. You can. It's just what you have to live with in terms of drivability, and you've got to be very liberal with your interpretation of what drivable means, I guess, at that point. Chuck saying, Sovereign, yes, 520 or more can be done. Sovereign saying, nice. Or when people put a wing on a Toyota Corolla, them down forces with the 4-cylinder for sure. Oh, 75's actually got a 75 swamp ass. Freaking love the name. Asking, is there a ratio on the supercharger or turbocharger size increase when increasing cubic inches? No. So what you're going to be looking at, well, yes and no. So what ends up happening with superchargers is you're going to lower the effective boost pressure all the while still moving the same amount of air. So you can potentially run more timing with larger displacement if you go from a timing to a larger timing. If you do go that route, you can run, in many cases, a little bit more timing because your discharge temperature just simply won't be as high because you're not compressing it. You're just basically moving it per se. Think of it like that. That'll kind of help the visual a little bit. Turbos, on the other hand, are a little bit different. Like, say you're starting off life with a 75 millimeter insert whatever turbo on your whatever cubic inch engine, and you go up big in cubic inches. Let's say you go from 392 to 440, or you go from 6 liters to 6.9 liters on a stroker or something like that. What you've got to look at that point is the actual physical back pressure that you're going to be working with. The back pressure itself is going to create an issue. Even though you're still going to be making boost, you'll end up way over that 1-to-1 happy ratio where you've got, say, 15 pounds of back pressure for 15 pounds of boost. You don't want to be in a situation where you're at like 26 PSI of exhaust pressure for 15 pounds of boost. That's going to cause, it's going to be much more susceptible to knock. The turbo is going to spool up real fast. And it'll build power really quickly, but it's going to trail off really quickly also. So a lot of the way that you set the car up has a lot to do with what cam are you running, what intake are you running, what for the supercharger, what exhaust style are you running. There's a lot you got to worry about or take into consideration, but I will typically say that if you go up in displacement, try it out with the stock pulley ratio first. With turbos, we've already kind of covered. You just know if you go more displacement, you might probably want to go with bigger turbos. presuming you didn't have a really big turbo for your initial displacement coming into it. So you put a stroker together with an engine that's already got a supercharger bolted to it. Try it with the stock, I say stock, the pre-existing pulley ratio first. You're going to notice that it dropped probably 2 or 3 pounds of boost, depending on how much you went up in displacement. It may make the same power, but you might be able to tune, in other words, right out of the box, right? But you can tune a little bit more power into it because you can maybe run a little bit more timing. On top of the fact that your discharge temperature will be lower, then you can run maybe a little bit more timing, still pick up some power from that. From there, you can go the next pulley on the supercharger down in size. Say that next pulley down is 1/8 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch is actually a pretty big jump down. See how the car responds, though, to 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch down in that pulley size. You'll probably reclaim the boost that you lost with the 1/4 inch pulley, and obviously you're playing with more displacement, so there you go. And that's assuming you're using the same cam, you just went with you already had a performance cam and you went bigger. If you put a much more aggressive cam in the thing, plus you added displacement to it, you're going to probably have to go larger lower pulley and probably a smaller upper pulley, depending on how that ratio works out, to where you can manage making close to the same boost that you were making before. So hopefully that helps give you an idea as far as how to kind of think of the boost proposition if you're thinking about stroking a boosted car. Cody's in saying, what's going on, B? What's up, Cody? Sovereign's talking about cambers. Yeah. There's a word for that. I forget what the actual word is. Oh, Madera's saying, I hate cars that are rowdy and lurchy at idle. Yeah, anything that surges or tries to push its way through a stoplight's never good. Cody's saying the 2 valves and 3 valves are for sure underrated. Oh, talking about the Ford stuff? Man, I tell you what, nothing sounds better than a 4.62 valve. That 4.6 liter size with the smaller valves, I don't care what power the thing makes. They just sound so freaking sweet. Just such a pretty sound to that car. And again, Chuck and Shift, thank you all very much, man. Appreciate it. Oh, Sovereign saying maintain and limit idle times. I think that was in reference to the long-term daily question. Cody's asking thoughts on a 392 Charger with a 309 gear change. They should already have that if it's a 392 Charger. Headers, exhaust, and tune. Fun car. I mean, you're going to pick up some power. It'll make about 4 1/4 to the rear wheels and be a lot of fun to drive. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was running around in for a long time with Shalandra. Oh, Gary's asking Cody about the 3, 2, and 3. Yep. Chuck saying, I talk to my Challenger often, but don't feel bad. Hey, I actually congratulate my car when she does good and tell her she's doing good. And that's what us car guys do. Did the same with bikes, man. I talk to my bike a lot. Oh, Stuart's asking, why was a 64 GTO considered the first muscle car when in 62 Pontiac, Mopar, and Ford all had muscle cars? It was considered the first muscle car because that's how it was marketed. It was the first muscle car. Let me try to put it to you like this. It was the first car that was sent out into the world as a true performance car, as opposed to like a 62 bubble top with a big block or anything like that. There were race cars back then, but the way that most people saw them, they didn't see them as like street cars, I guess, like a true muscle car. But I have had the same question as you. I don't understand why the 64 GTO was considered the first muscle car when, you're right, you had cars from Dodge before that. You had, the Polara with a 426, although that was technically a race car. You had, a lot of cars before that in super stock racing that were kind of a big deal. To be honest with you, I'm really not sure, because it depends on what you consider a muscle car. You can go further back than that with the 300 letter series Mopars from the 50s. Obviously, Christine with a 350 cubic inch big block, dual quads. Sounds a little bit like a muscle car to me. So, you know, where does it stop? Where does it start? I really don't know, honestly. And I've never really received an answer that satisfied my curiosity on that. Marketing is what made it the first muscle car, I guess. Had a story behind it, which is absolute BS. But I was saying the GM 496 Vortec can be nasty if woken up. They are right if put in a smaller vehicle. Of course it would be. And Randy's saying, I talk too much to mine. I know, right? George is saying, I'm late, but glad I caught it. Love the info. You got it, brother. Yeah, this is a little bit different show. I started out, I tried doing this video, guys. This is what's funny. I tried doing this video as a standalone video, and then I was going to come back this Saturday and we'd talk about it and, you know, go over some things. The funny thing about it is every time I tried to get rolling with this video tonight, I would again start talking about other stuff. You'd think I could not get it to actually form into something that I could do as a standalone video, because there were so many moving parts to this. And I wanted to try to do it justice without completely putting myself or you guys to sleep. So, you know, that's really where a lot of this, doing this one as a live show came from. But there is a lot to go over. And, you know, realistically, if you're planning on spending this kind of money on your car, the stroker motor guys are a hardcore group, no doubt about it. And, you know, there's not a right or a wrong answer to this, by the way. I mean, you can always put a blower on a stroker motor, but the idea is there are a lot of options out there in terms of making power. And I can tell you this, guys, but ain't none of them cheap. And with this being the most expensive way to go about it, provided that you are looking to do a stroker motor. Now, the 5.7 guys have got it actually pretty good, because for them, you know, it's basically a tune. Put a 6.4 block in your if you've got a truck, it's really good, because you go get a 6.4, put that in your truck, because it's it's got the short runner valve that the trucks do have. It's a whole lot easier to bolt in, you know, a big chunk of power. So, I get why the truck guys, you know, are really quick to go 392, because it's super easy to do. Sovereign saying 37 watching, but only 28 likes. Yes, like, subscribe, share, and then like it again, ring the bell, personalize it, do all of that good stuff. Need all the help we can get. But thank you, Sovereign. I appreciate that, buddy. Oh, sorry. Oh, talking about to Chuck, a 50th anniversary Shaker Scat Pack. I've got a thing for that color Gold Rush. I don't know what it is, but I really like that. Gary's hanging out with Cody. Oh, yeah. 96 Cobra, awesome car. And a 982V Pro Charge putting out 687. Nice. Oh, Chuck found one in cinnamon stick. That's a sick looking color in real life. That by the way, print does not do that. Video, any of it does not do that color any justice. Chuck's saying got a few years to go on my loan. Boy, I understand that. Stuart's saying, yeah, with the kitty, it's easy to get in trouble. It's real easy. Let's see, Gary's hanging out with oh, yeah, can't go wrong with those choices for sure. 551 to the wheels at 515. Yeah, 515 is the legit number. I mean, look, like I say, you can go more than that, but here's the problem. At some point, see, here's the thing. At some point, you're going to find yourself you don't want to find yourself wishing you would not have gone too far. You always want to leave a little bit on the plate. And the reason why I say that is if you take the thing too far, you will want to get rid of it much more quickly. Because believe me when I tell you, I mean, like I say, I've lived this, guys. Over and over again, I've gone through this, and some truths will start to really sink in, and that is, if you build something that for the street that caps out around 6,300 RPM, 6,500 RPM, somewhere in that range, it will be a lot of fun to drive. Like, it will have good torque, it'll have good horsepower, it'll be awesome all the way around. When you try to start driving something into like the 7,000 RPM, 7,200 RPM range, what ends up happening is you build something that is way too hard on valve train parts. You're really not worried about the rotating assembly. Don't worry about that. That's not what you're concerned with. What you're worried about is valve train stability. And this is where obviously overhead cam stuff has massive advantages. See, the problem with the Hemi is that the Hemi has valves that are about this freaking big around. They're huge and they're heavy. They've got a funky valve train geometry. You've got to run 080 push rod, 080 wall thickness push rods, which are, again, heavy. There's a lot of weight and a lot of inertia that you have to overcome, and it's just hell on valve train parts. So mitigating some of that needs to be part of the plan when you're putting these things together. And again, 6,500 RPM is cake. That's nothing. Easy money. But 6,800 RPM might be a little bit of a problem. 7,000 RPM can be a bit of a problem. So just know that coming into it, the higher you want, the more power you want to make, the higher you're going to have to rev that thing. And the more that is going to end up costing you in terms of wear and in, obviously parts, but you're going to be spending the money anyway, so don't worry about that. So we're saying 500 sounds like a good number to me. Yeah. See, Stuart's hanging out with Chuck. Let's see. Oh, Gary's saying, wait, what happened here? Oh, maybe I missed something. I was saying, nope, you can't still build and do 4-valve swaps for people, along with cam and performance mods to get 1, 2, 3 Fords and Gen 3 Hemis. I love Force, man. I just got a thing for 4.6s. They just, probably because they sound so good. Plus, they're fun. So I used to use Mustangs as work vehicles because I could put 150,000 miles on them, and I would put 150,000 miles on those cars in the span of like 2.5 to 3 years. But I could put a ton of miles on them, and they were super durable, and they didn't cost me anything other than just oil changes and maintenance. So I had got so many miles under my butt with 4.6 2-valve cars. And all of them had exhaust because I love the way they sound. Chuck saying in training. Yep. Let's see. Cody say was watching a 392 Charger earlier today on YouTube, thrown down against an A10 Mustang, and it had everything going well for it until the Mustang's top end took over. Makes me contemplate the $5,000 extra. You know what's funny? So to that point, every one of these cars has their strengths and weaknesses, obviously. The Mustang, what's weird about the Mustang is that they'll be dead even until the Mustang hits like the top of 4th or 5th gear. And that's where the Mustang will start to actually walk around. Part of that has to do with a gearing advantage. But one of the things is just how well that barge will hang with that little Mustang up to that number. you would almost think that the Mustang should start pulling away sooner than it does. But yeah, the Mustangs have a great top end rush, and it's a Mustang. I mean, it does Mustang stuff. Stuart's saying, oh, see, I had a 1320, now I have a Cat. Thinking about getting another 1320. Trade in the Hellcat. Hey, Stuart, I'm going to tell you something. You are not the only person to hit me up with, or to vocalize that. I've had guys reach out to me and ask, hey, would I consider selling my Hellcat to get a 1320 given my experience with the 1320? Or having guys say, man, I want to stay Dodge, but I don't want the Hellcat anymore. Let me tell you where a lot of this is coming from. A lot of it's coming from the fact that Hellcats are weird cars because they're big and they're eerily fast. And a lot of guys feel like they just can't enjoy the car on the street. You cannot hoon a Hellcat the way that you can a Scat Pack. They want to be able to feel the power that they bought. They want to be able to use every horsepower that they paid hard-earned dollars for. And so the Scat Pack becomes extremely attractive in that light. A lot of guys, their ego won't let them get past, the whole Hellcat for Scat Pack or Hellcat for 1320 thing. But look, man, if you're not having fun with the car, you don't have a place where you can ring it out. You don't have... there's just something that is calling you back to the NA side, man, do it. Because I'll be honest with you, there are times where I've thought, man, not that I would get rid of my Hellcat, because I have to say I love my Hellcat, most favorite car I've ever owned. But there are times where I miss the fun snappiness that you would get with a 392, and they're just a lot of fun, in general. So I would say that you would not be alone if you chose to go that route. If you're like, man, look, Hellcat, you've been a lot of fun, but I just don't feel I can use you to the potential that I would want to use 700 plus horsepower on the street. Because let's be real, where are you really going to air this thing out? Weird thing about having a car that can go damn near 200 miles an hour, which people forget about the Hellcat. It's a freaking 200 mile per hour car. When does it start to get interesting? 130, 150? These things, you can't even feel how fast you're going in them at 140 or 150 miles an hour. So I get it, 100% understand it. And if you were thinking about going back to a 1320, I would understand wholeheartedly. Randy's asking, with the newer engines, does a big cam affect vacuum the way that it did in my old race street 340 Duster? 100% yes, absolutely. Some are saying 497 is nice. 497 is even better when the cam doesn't even have a lope to it. Madera's saying the Triton series is underrated, but maybe for good reason. The Triton series was made out of the 5.4 and the 6.8. It's quite actually the 6.8 was pretty butch. But the Triton, a lot of people didn't like it. I had an 09 F-150, and if you've never owned one, the cam phaser click is something that just make you want to shoot that thing. Pulling up to a drive-through and it's clack, 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 clack. It sounded like a diesel. Gary's hanging out with Cody. Say he's got plenty of videos running Mustangs in the 8th mile. My 6-speed gives the 6R80 and 10R80s hell for tire for tire. But the Mustang could have used a better driver mod. So the funny thing about it is, a lot of guys talk about the Mustang versus the Scat Pack thing. And I know people like to talk about the street, because on the street's the street. And when the street is talking, the street is the street. And man, I got this on the street. I'll take it to the street. We'll run it from a dig street, roll, race, whatever. And it's like, dude, shut the fuck. So at a drag strip where it's legal to race people, anyway, from a dig, tire for tire, I never, and I've said this over and over again, I may have lost one race to a like modded Mustang. In other words, I would have to give the Mustang the hit and then have the Mustang come back around me on the big end to win. And I'm not talking about one of these full, I'm talking about a real street car versus a real street car tire for tire. I'm not talking about gutted for gutted this and all this other, no. We're just talking about Mustang, bolt-on, tune, whatever. They were gunning me down, but I would just typically, we would run out of real estate before they had the opportunity to really get me. But you got to remember that we're talking about cars in the Mustang that would trap 121 miles an hour, 122 miles an hour, and I was trapping 117 or 118 miles an hour. So, depending on conditions, I could probably eke maybe a 119 out of it, but that's even asking too much. I mean, really the car was a 118, 117 car. To a Mustang's 120, 121. It's just a matter of seconds before that Mustang were to catch me and start marching around me. So they offer up completely different driving experiences, which is why I love the Mustang so much. Because if I wanted something with a lot of top end rush, there's your Mustang. If you want that bottom end and mid-range hard grunt in a big muscly car, you got the Dodge for that. Unfortunately, the Camaro just couldn't really find a home for the middle ground, and people just didn't really buy too many of them by comparison. Let's see. KC's asking, hey Mason, are you a fan of the 410 5.7, and how far away from power is that from a 426 car? Man, I don't know, dude. I think the more you try to push the 5.7, the less sense that it makes. It's not going to be that far away in terms of power from a 426, although it will be down in displacement, and you're going to have to find an intake that's really going to work for you. Probably go with the Sniper at that point, though, with that engine. Combination, I don't know if you want to go through the headache of trying to make a 6.4 manifold work with that combo, but if it's going into a truck, then I would use the truck upper intake manifold, though, or upper intake. I'd use the truck intake manifold. Talking too much about Fords there for a minute. But for me, what is that going to have? Like a 4 1/4 stroke, I guess. And the 400 stroker is going to check in at 4 1/4 stroke. No, 4080. So, a 410 is going to be a 410, 415 stroke, give or take. That'll put you in the ballpark. It's good. I mean, you do that with a set of ported heads if you wanted to port the heads. In a lumpy cam, it'll put you in a decent range. I mean, you'd probably be looking at about, with a stock intake manifold, probably somewhere around 450-ish horsepower, give or take, to the rear wheels on a real optimistic, real generous Mustang dyno. But that'll give you an idea. I mean, I say that that would take a lot of cam to get you there, though. Gary is out. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man. Have a good night at work. Oh, Sovereign's hanging out with Madeira, F-150 with the Triton and the spark plugs. Luckily, I have an 09. The earlier ones had 2-piece spark plugs that would fall apart. Stuart's asking, what if the 392 went to a dual overhead cam setup? Would that increase the power? Undoubtedly, it would increase the power. The heads would flow a whole lot more. Again, presumably, depending on how they design it. But the problem is the size of the thing would grow immensely. You would add about 6 inches to 8 inches per side of just length, of the size of the V, so to speak. So packaging would be a bit of a bear. And you can make some arguments that it could be overcomplicated for the size. I say that. So my M156 that was in the Mercedes was a 6.2 liter. This dual overhead cam engine is basically the same displacement as the 6.4. So I mean, it can be packaged, and technically that was packaged in an LX platform. So it could definitely be done, although that engine did take up the entire engine compartment of that car. Shift is saying, for the sake of argument, if my stock 2016 M6 Scat Pack takes damage / wear over the years on my cam and lifter, should I upgrade with the same OEM parts or upgrade to 2022 M6 parts? I want my Scat Pack stock. I'm in California. Man, if you're maintaining that car, bro, you're going to have a real hard time wearing it out. I mean, we just have seen those things get so many miles put on them. It'll be elective surgery, so to speak, if you decide to go that route. But it's always a direction you can go. The Juice saying Chevy dropped the 632 double Z. Did they really? That's too bad. Cody saying Dodge and Ford are on a completely different level compared to Chevy now. Yeah, I would agree with that. BB saying, good evening, Professor. What's up, BB? What would you say my car should dyno? 2010 6.1 Challenger, NAG 1, SLP exhaust, long tubes, PSI 15-16 springs, 080 push rods, leg maker intake, and cam. Cam is a secret. 112 center line, 218 intake, 226 exhaust. Cool little cam. That's very similar to my contender grind, by the way. Let's see. That would make on a, let me think about this, on a dyno jet. Well, let me think about this on a Mustang dyno first. 6.1, 218 cam with the goodies. One thing is you got the right springs in it. No question about that. I'm going to say it would make 385-ish, give or take, to the rear wheels. 385, maybe 390 on a Mustang dyno would be my guess on that. It's going to make more than a 5.7 cammed, and it's going to have a nice fat torque curve, probably like 390 torque, and it's going to carry it really well, especially with that 112. It's going to have a real fun, peaky, real cheeky attitude car to drive. That's a lot of fun to drive, by the way, especially with a 6.1 with that intake manifold. That's a really good combination. That cam with that intake manifold. It'd be a really fun car to drive. Congratulations on the combo. Oh, Gary's saying he's got a 2020 cinnamon stick. Yes. Gary and Shift hanging out. BB saying shop sent me a dyno which shows 470, which is perfect, because that would be about right, because that is very similar to what a tuned 392 would put down. So depending on, like, if it's a power steering 392 or whatever, because you're running the hydraulic power steering on your car, the hydraulic power steering 392 cars with a tune, stock would put down 380, and with a tune on a dyno jet, you'd see like 460. So yeah, that's perfect. That is about right. So, you know, I might've been a little bit off on the horsepower and torque numbers, but in terms of actual power, yeah, I would say that would be about right. Oh, Cody's saying an NA 392 would shock a lot of people when it's built right. Yeah, you want to talk about a car that would freak people out. Quick Bricks Charger would run with pretty much everybody's NA Mustang on the street from a roll, which would really blow their minds, because they would go looking for 392s, because it would be something good for them to show them coming around a 392 on the big end. And when those cars didn't come around his car, it would absolutely freak him out. Um, Stewart said he overheard someone say today that the Dodge Omni was one of the first four-cylinder turbos. Is that true? It's kind of true. At that point in time, you're talking about the early to mid 80s. There may have been some stuff in the 70s, but I don't think that's really what they're talking about. Mass-produced turbo, what you would consider V8 replacement turbo four-cylinders, it really started in 79 with the Mustang with the 2.3 liter. But the 2.2 liter that you would find, the turbo 2.2 that you would find in the Omni, the Daytona, the 600, there were several cars that were kind of considered hot rods back then that had that engine in them. So, hell, I had an 84 600 turbo. All of them really cool cars and neat to find nowadays. Nobody's really looking for a 600, but an Omni or a Daytona would actually be pretty neat cars to find. And they were all coming out around the same time back then. Oh, Herbert's saying he's got a Scatty raced a Mustang GT350 at the track. Got the jump on him. He was on his door the whole run. Those are actually really hard to drive at the drag strip, or harder than what you might think. Gary saying, same B, lost one due to Barton shifter handle got loose. Note to self, keep Allen wrench on hand for sure. Red Loctite, or at least blue Loctite is your friend. Eric's saying, have had Mustang spraying hard to get around me in my NA 392 in a single cab Ram in the 8th, for sure. That's where, man, I'm telling you guys, again, every car has its strength, and Mopars are nasty in the 8th, for sure. Sovereign's saying he's got an 06 F-150. Yep, that's the Triton. Since Dodge is making an inline 6, will they bring back the SRT6 name as well? Man, who knows? But that might be the next thing that they do. Although SRT is kind of out, the name is, but maybe they'll bring it back. I say it's out, but they're still using it in Hellcat. Ryan's asking, what is the biggest cam to go with for a 2020 Charger RT stock heads? I was looking at Comp Cam Stage 2. That's the HHR cam 220-230. So what you may know is the for the 392 or the 5.7, what kind of ended up shaking loose after you sifted out all of the cam profiles, what ended up shaking loose was a 220-ish cam for the 5.7 and the 6.4. The HHR is a 220-230. I think intake center line's 109 on 115 degree lobe separation angle, something like that. Good little cam. I've got a cam through Dr. Differential in Speed. It's my sniper cam. I'm sorry, Joker cam. And the Joker cam, basically the same idea. I mean, it's a variant of a cam that I used for the 392s. Very similar specs, a little bit tighter lobe separation angle. Check out Dr. Differential in Speed if you want to just YouTube it, look up Joker cam. And that's one of my cams that he runs with. Really good combination. Works well. Put it together initially as a nitrous grind for 5.7s. It just happens to work really well naturally aspirated. So nothing too crazy, but definitely a fun cam to play with. No doubt about it. Let's see. But if you're asking what the biggest cam to go with is, that's probably the biggest I would personally go. That cam's pretty racy sounding, and really any more than that, and you're going to start to hemorrhage bottom end torque. I mean, it's already, I'm not going to say soft. It's obviously there's always going to be a trade-off, low for high, but with the tighter lobe separation angle, that cam does come on the cam pretty quickly, and you don't lose too much in terms of torque, feel of it anyway. When it comes on the cam, it hits pretty hard. But what I will say is any bigger than that, and it just ends up being, I think, a little bit too much for the street. Ship is saying, thanks, talking to Gary, Mr. R&D. Yes, maintenance is up to par. Thanks to my OCD. Very good. Chuck is heading out. S&C Saturday, hopefully. The good Lord allows, yes. Cody's saying the GT350 for sure is a driver's car. Lots of fun to drive, by the way. Cody's saying, I absolutely want to bring back the SRT4 name. I'm cool with any of it, man. Listen, I'm a big fan of all of it. I can figure out a way to make all of it fast. I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is, when is this stuff going to hit? What can I start to look forward to? How can I start figuring out ways to make stuff go faster? That's really more what I'm thinking about than anything else. I'm not really worried so much about, is it going to be a 6-cylinder versus a V8? Hell, guys, we've seen the same 392 now for the better part of a decade. I don't think they're going to change anything with it. Let's see what else they can do. Let's see. 75 Swamp Ass saying a Hellcat with a 426 stroker. Would you chance throwing on the old 10% lower Joker's ported 2.4 Charger with a 275 310 upper and possibly have to pay to retune it with a bigger blower? Well, here's the thing. Let's say you got a Hellcat, you decide to drop a 426 on it. This is kind of a weird thing for me because you have to spin the piss out of that supercharger to get that thing to act right. I know this from experience. So what I would say is, first of all, throw a 285 upper on the thing with the 426. That'll at least get you back your stock boost. Maybe a little bit more than that. The Joker ported supercharger, for the money, it's like, I don't even know if I would do it. I'm sure it works out great. I just, between that and a much larger throttle body is what you're going to need. I mean, you're going to have to go with a snout that's been opened up to 102 millimeters. Don't even bother with anything else. I mean, you want to jack that thing open as big as you can with the 426. Again, a 285 will probably get you, a 310 will for sure get you your boost back. A 285 or a 295 might get you a little bit more than stock in terms of boost, but it's going to absolutely make some killer power though. So there's that, at least you can go with. And yeah, it's definitely going to have to be retuned, but I would say this with that combination, obviously you're going to be going with a different cam. And that's why I'm talking about the 285, by the way. You start a stock cam with a stroker, you could technically do that. And you would just have more torque basically everywhere until the supercharger became inefficient. But the good thing about the 2.4 is that you can spin them pretty hard. The only thing is you're not really going to make more horsepower, but you will make more torque, especially at tip in and down low. So, and you'll do so in making less boost. So that's always good too. But if you decided to go with a different cam, I can tell you this, 10% lower with a 285 upper on a 426 on corn with a fairly healthy cam is a low 9-second car. And I can tell you that would probably be one of the spookier combinations you'd run up against anywhere on the street. But now you're talking fuel system and significant tuning, bigger injectors and everything else. So just know that coming into that, that's going to be pretty tough. And again, a lot of it depends on just how far you want to try to take it by running the stock supercharger. You go with like a 3-liter Whipple or one of the bigger Whipples, the 4.5, running a 375 upper or a Maggie for that matter, with a cam, etceteras, right? I know for a fact one of those combinations through Pikes with one of my cams was making 966 to the rear wheels on a Mustang dyno. On a dyno jet, I think it made like 1070 or 1090 or something like that. So anyway, just kind of worked out that way, but yeah, I mean, you can definitely do it. It just, once you start adding cubic inches to Hellcats and camshafts to Hellcats, the problem is you've got to add so much boost to bring the thing back up to any sense of like responsiveness. And the other thing is, at that point, do you decide, okay, look, I'm going E85 for life on this thing and bring compression ratio from 9.5 to 1 to like 10 to 1 or 10.5 to 1, which is what I would recommend if you're going to go that route on corn. I mean, no sense in just throwing boost at it when you can throw compression ratio at it and get the free power from that along with the corn and then build from there with the boost. It does make a difference at that point. In fact, it makes a big difference. So, once you start going down that route, you've got to really think about the combination that you're putting together for sure. Zach saying, is a Scat Pack a viable car to get when thinking about the future of performance cars? I've been bringing your content or checking out your content for a while, it looks like, now to learn about your Mopar, and I love it. Keep it up. Thank you, man. So here's the thing. I will say that a lot of people back in the day would consider a Challenger to be disposable. All of the old 70s Challengers, 70s, 71 Challengers were considered disposable. And then you get to the frowny face, 72, 3, and 4, which people even forget even existed, those Challengers. There will be a period of time where these cars will seem that way. They'll seem disposable, but the reality is that they're really good cars. And they represent something kind of special in this new era of muscle cars that we have. So, yeah, I would say, if the question is it a collector's item? It's kind of hard to say it's a collector's item. Even the Hellcats, they're special, but they made a whole lot of them. But if you're thinking about the future of performance cars, you have to really start to define what you're calling a performance car at that point, because the future of performance cars, outright performance, 0 to 60, numbers that freak you out and scare you to death, are all EVs. And as the cost of EVs comes down and the convenience goes up, that is going to be just more mainstream than what it is now. What I mean mainstream is the performance. For gasoline powered cars, this is the high watermark for them. I mean, you are now at the limit of what 91 or 93 octane can realistically handle for this weight on the street. It just, obviously you can tune them and get more power out of these things with more boost. Talking about Hellcats, really, with less weight. But again, modern cars weigh more because they have more stuff going on with them, so you need more power to move them. Just so happens we're able to make a lot more power now, but again, like I say, you are at the high watermark for what 93 octane gasoline can effectively work with. $75 saying, those are my old parts, old rods, MIA for sure. And Shift's asking a random question. Do you have any experience with 2010 and 2015 ZL1? Not a whole lot personally. If so, any tips and tricks with mods? My little brother just got a ZL1 with an M6 tranny, a fun car, just interior too tight like his old Coyote. Yeah, no, I don't have a whole lot of experience with those. So, it's one of those things where you'd have to kind of go with folks that are really good with those cars. Unfortunately, I just never had the opportunity to play with them. Not the way that I would like to, but they are fun cars nonetheless. In fact, God, I came about this close to buying one at one point. I mean, I came so close to getting one. I should have bought it. Some are saying that's why the 392 impresses me. That's a lot of power from an NA engine. It's a lot of power from an NA engine with a lobe separation that's like that and just so wide, 120-ish lobe separation angle. It's a 392 that's making 485 horsepower. That's just unheard of for a factory car. It just, for a 2-valve, for old school hot rodders, they just go, I can't figure it out. Yeah, they're just trying to figure, and how they do it with an idle that just sits there and idles like a normal car is just crazy to them. But oh, Zach's talking about being able to test drive some of the newer NA cars compared to a Scat. See, Zach's onto something here, guys. The fact of the matter is that Mopars are just more fun to drive. And that's, again, I mean, I've said that about the 5.7 trucks versus the World. I've said that about the Mopars just in general. When it comes to being fun to drive and just putting a grin on your face, you know, you can't beat the Mopar. You just can't. You cannot beat the Mopars. They're just too much fun to drive. From a American muscle car standpoint, they're just too dang much fun. A lot of guys feel the same way about certain hot hatches. Other guys feel the same way about other platforms, but, you know, other types of cars. But for the American muscle car segment, when it comes to fun, it's practically, for me anyway, impossible to beat that modern Hemi. Is just so tough. SRT20 saying hello. And with SRT20s, 1320 saying hello, guys. We are 2 hours and 10 minutes in. I gotta wrap this up. I gotta wake up with the Amish, so I gotta make that happen. So with that, guys, I want to thank y'all very much. Appreciate all the love and support. Would not do this without you. Love each and every one of you guys. Thanks so much for the contributions, guys. I really, truly appreciate that a ton. But with that, I do got to go. Get out there and do something cool for somebody. Remember, if you're going to send it, don't bend it. Keep your shiny side up. And with that, I am out. Y'all have a great one. We'll catch you on the next one. Adios.